All right, go ahead.
All right, welcome everyone. Thursday, November 18th to Advisory Design Panel. First item on the agenda is to welcome everyone to the unceded Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. And then we've got adoption of agenda, but Jonas Valniskas has suggested an amendment that we add an item above today's development permit, and that's for this is just a catch up for new panel members. Is that right, Jonas?
Yeah, every year we try to do this refresher session with ADP members because we do have some new members and maybe some useful information for existing members around the roles and responsibilities of ADP.
Okay, can I get a motion for that? Reem, second. David, all in favor? If you're not in favor, raise your hand. Is that how it works again, David? Remind me? Yeah. Okay, not in favor, raise your hand. Everyone's in favor. Okay, so we will amend that agenda and adopt the agenda. Can I get a motion for adoption of the agenda? David, seconded by Reem again. Okay, excellent. Minutes. So hopefully you've all reviewed the minutes from the last meeting. Okay, anything you want to add to those minutes? Not seeing anything, so a motion to approve minutes. David again. Seconded by Jamie. All right. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. That's great. And with that, this is still the plan to proceed with Jonas. I'll let you take the floor, sir.
I do see the architect now on, but I think Brian may be missing, so I can go ahead.
I'm back if you want to stick with the regular agenda. I do think the architect has joined now. Maybe I'll just ask there, is everyone from the team for DP 556 on the line? Or 566, I forget which one. It's 556, sorry.
Well, we see Jessica.
If they're not here, they can't answer you.
Yeah. I believe it's just Craig, you and Jessica are on the line, right? So are you guys ready to go?
Sure.
Okay. All right, Brian, I'll let you take it away.
Sweet, thank you. So good afternoon, Advisory Design Panel. My name is Brian Daly, Development and Subdivision Coordinator with Community Planning. I'm here this afternoon to present DP 566 at 1450 Highway 99. The project is a multi-tenant light industrial building. It is located on the west side of Highway 99, east of the rail line adjacent to the Sea and Sky residential development and south of this Shell gas station. The project was previously presented to ADP at the July 8th, 2021 meeting. At the meeting, the ADP passed the motion that they supported DP 566 as presented, but would like the applicant to resolve a number of recommendations and return to present the revised project to ADP. The applicant has made an attempt to address the comments provided by ADP and has now returned to present their revisions to the project and how they have attempted to address the comments previously provided by ADP. So with that, I will pass it over to the architect for the project to present their revisions.
Okay. Am I set up to share content?
If you're having an issue with that, I have a copy of your presentation, so I can run it for you if you'd like.
Yeah, I can't. The share content thing isn't permitting me to. Oh, now I can share. Okay, and there's like a share screen aspect here. Maybe I'll get you to share, Brian.
could I get the ability to share, please? Can everyone see that all right?
Yeah.
All right, if you just want to let me know when to change slides, I'll do so.
Okay, so I guess carrying on from Brian's introduction, we initially presented the project on July 8th. And since then, we've taken into consideration the comments from the advisory design panel and have made revisions to the project based upon those comments. We'll just introduce you to the project here. This image was kind of produced based upon how you would enter into the project off of Mill Road. On the other side of this image, like behind us, would be the gas station. And to the left side of the image, those trees, they are along the SPA area, the riparian area. And that area is along Highway 99 or Sea to Sky. And then to the right-hand side of this image would be the railroad tracks and the new residential development developed by BOSA. We go to the next slide, Brian. So this slide here is about describing the project, which Brian has already done and which I continue to do. So we understand that it's along Highway 99. We have the CN railroad tracks on the other side. On the north side is a gas station. And then there's, on the south side is an adjacent neighbor property. I believe there's a church there. And on the further to the west side is the new residential development community that's been developed by BOSA. On the northeast corner of the site, we've identified that there's a special protected environmental area or riparian area. The site does have a slope, but is relatively flat. And we've taken that into account with the stepping of the buildings. And well, previously we had shown a project that consisted of two buildings, one that was relatively long along the east side of the site and a shorter one on the west side. We've now divided it up into three buildings, which was one of the recommendations made by the design panel. So we're currently showing three buildings with the long building that was divided into two. What we've done in the separation of the building is kind of provided for a public amenity space that's a bit of a landscaped area that we'll talk about later. Somehow we got to the next slide kind of quickly, but maybe that's because you want me to speed up. Okay. So I think previously it's understood that the site and currently it has some buildings on it. It was a former logging site known as Alaho. There are some existing buildings on site that are pre-engineered buildings that are in not particularly good shape, and there's a bit of an existing silo structure which is structurally unsound. The site itself is kind of covered in, I guess, hog fill, which is kind of old wood waste. So it creates some interesting geotechnical conditions. And one of the challenges that we're having to face with this particular development is being able to manipulate a crane on the site and be able to lift considerably heavy panels into place. Go to the next slide, please. So yeah, we mentioned the topography, rising gradually from the north side to the south side. Mentioned that it sits on a considerable amount of wood waste. We mentioned that there's going to be some difficulties in us building the site where we're having to consider the size of the panels and the weights of the panels. So we do have some logistical constraints that are based a little bit upon the geotechnical conditions. And I guess we can just go to the next site or slide, seeing as we've covered this already. So this slide here kind of talks about a few of the things that we did in regards to the previous comments by ADP. So if we move from the entrance along Mill Road, which has been identified as item 1, we kind of reconfigured the parking at that location and provided a new public amenity area on the north side of Building 3. It's sort of been proposed or requested that if there's a possibility of us using any of the existing Alaho material or historical material to build kind of a landscape trellis or something in that area, that we would try to do that and incorporate it. We would have to see kind of what condition that material might be in when we kind of dismantle things on site. Number 2 identifies kind of pedestrian pathways that have been incorporated through the site from building 1 along to building 2, with kind of this intersection, which is also identified by building 3, or number 3, where we separated building 1 and 2, where we've provided another crossing there through the site, as well as a separation between the 2 buildings that I referenced earlier, with a little bit of a public amenity area with some landscaping in there as well. So go to the next slide. So these are our written responses, which I take it you've probably all reviewed already, concerning the things that we've done to try to address the comments that were previously made. So one of the things that was significant was changing the color palettes. So we had a pretty thorough review of what was being done at the residential development by BOSA. And we tried to take some materiality and materials and colors from that development and incorporate it into this, this project, so that there was a better relationship between the two. We've added continuous pedestrian pathways. It was a bit of a challenge for us to accommodate covered pathways, just because the nature of the buildings on the site changes kind of dramatically throughout, and it's kind of difficult to control a lot of the sizes of the vehicles or cube vans or LSUs that would be on the site, and the site is rather tight. So we opted not to provide continuous covered pathways, but we have provided canopies at all of the entrances, which, you know, which does provide some cover. So already reviewed the form and character. I mean, it is an industrial development, so I mean, it's not going to reference anything that's residential in nature. But we have tried to be complementary in terms of colors that we've incorporated. And on building 3, we opted, which is the building that faces the residential neighborhood, we've opted to provide some slopes to the concrete panels to kind of provide the kind of a better visual connectivity in terms of that residential development. And make them somewhat a little bit more similar. Go to the next slide. So we're just kind of showing some images of what the project site looks like from Highway 99. The image at the top with the orange car directly behind it, and those are kind of the existing pre-engineered metal buildings that are on the site right now. What we're proposing is going to be significantly more attractive than what's currently there. And what we are also proposing is about approximately the same height as those existing buildings. When you look at the image on the bottom left with the silver car, That silver car is moving up the slope, and then to the right is the riparian area. So during the summer months, there's some pretty heavy foliage where, you know, it kind of obscures a bit of what that new development or the proposed new development will be, but you would still be able to capture kind of glimpses of it through the trees. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, we're basically looking towards that same riparian area. But this is from the vantage point of the gas station, and a little bit further to the right of that, kind of beyond where that gas station is, where that would be where the entrance is to the site, and then further down would be the railroad crossing and the residential development. So next slide, please. So again, these are some more images kind of showing what those buildings look like on the site from different vantage points. But you can see that it's fairly heavily foliaged. The buildings there that are existing are old. There isn't a huge great use to that site other than, you know, it was used for an industrial purpose of forestry. You know, the site coverage that we're going to be providing here is you know, going to provide a lot of good opportunities for local businesses and business people. So next slide. So these are the conditions in winter. So again, the density of like the natural environment there and the trees still provides quite a bit of canopy. And then you can see from the other vantage point of the railroad tracks, you can see the blue buildings in the distance, and the site kind of condition today at the bottom is that's kind of what's there right now. So while it's an older picture and you can see the construction of the residential development in the background, you know, what's there right now could use some development and an upgrade. Next slide. So this is our cover image again. And in the bottom left-hand corner, we're showing the vantage point of image 1 there with the arrow. And again, this is the entrance to the site and kind of what you would see as you enter the site. To the right-hand side, there's some bicycle parking. There's the revised parking area in that location. And then up along what would be building 3, or the north side of building 3, is a little public amenity space. The individual on the left-hand side is approaching building 1 along the sidewalk and approaching the crossing there. And like I said, we're going to try to continue that pedestrian path throughout the site. We'll go to the next slide. And then this is vantage point 2. So we're on Highway 99 here, looking towards the riparian area. We have kind of the access to the site on the right-hand side of that image. That would be where the gas station is. And you can just kind of see what we're proposing for our project to be discreetly nestled in there adjacent to the riparian area. Next slide, please. So the exact same vantage point, but this is the winter condition. So there's still, you know, a considerable amount of obscurity just provided by the natural environment there in the riparian area. The buildings are more visible, but you know, they're still nestled in there nicely with the natural environment. Next image. So this image here is you would be having to be driving you'd be driving south along Highway 99 and looking over your shoulder, or if you happen to be a pedestrian walking along the highway at this location. This is kind of what you would see looking down from the highway. So we have like building articulation, we have different color palette, we have entrance canopies, bit of signage on there. And just go to the next slide. And then angle 4, we're looking from kind of the parking and waste and recycling area towards the south end of building 2. And just go to the next slide. And then image 5 here is kind of looking south between building 1 and building 3, looking towards building 2. And you can see the stepping of the building 2 in the background there. We're showing the pedestrian path, and then we're showing the covered entrances along the paths there. And on the right-hand side, you can see some people that are just hanging out underneath those canopies. Next slide. So one of the things that we did based upon some suggestions and recommendations by ADP was we introduced color palettes that were more akin to what was being proposed by the BOSA development. But we've also placed those colors so that they're help to identify each of the different buildings. So each of the buildings now can kind of be color differentiated, which could be used as a wayfinding technique in future. We kind of revised our elevations and the schemes a little bit. We broke up buildings 1 and 2. And then we've revised our renderings and elevations to help better demonstrate to you what's happening with these buildings on the site. We'll go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that's on the existing BOSA property is some standing seam metal cladding, which is an appropriate industrial material. So we've used it as an accent piece on the facades of the concrete tilt-up panels. We provided some landscaping areas at the entrance, at the amenity space along building 3 and in the division between 1 and 2. We've increased the amount of glazing as much as possible, considering it's a concrete tilt-up building and there are some limitations. All the concrete panels are painted. We've introduced some additional wood elements in tapered columns with glass and timber canopies. And then we're also proposing that we do a roofscape so that the roofs that are visible from Highway 99 reflect more like a riverscape or river shoals with some logs placed on there and some oversized boulders with some differentiation in the color of the river rock that's used on the roof. Next slide, please. So here we're just showing you the color palettes that we're proposing to use on the buildings and kind of where we got some of that inspiration from with the residential development. Go to the next slide, please. So the elevations that we worked on here, what we wanted to do was emphasize the amount of stepping that and differentiation in the facades that actually happens with this project. I think in the presentation we did on July 8th that this wasn't as evident as it is now, that we've taken the time to better describe how the building facades move in and out. Next slide, please. So here we're just kind of showing the southeast facade of building 2, kind of showing the introduction of some of these other materials that we're proposing to use on the building that ties it in a little bit better to the existing BOSA development. Next slide, please. So again, trying to show the materials, the differentiation in colors, emphasizing the stepping in the facades a little bit more so that it's more apparent about what these buildings are doing. Next slide, please. And I'll ask Jessica maybe to comment on the landscape drawings that she developed.
Hi. So I think Craig has mentioned the major changes here in these amenity spaces already, but I'll just run through them quickly. This is at the entrance to the site on the left, the image on the left. And so there is pedestrian access on the west side of the entrance road that would also connect to this amenity space where there are bike racks and picnic tables that are under a cover. Craig had discussed earlier that we are open to exploring the possibility of reusing some of the heritage building materials At this point, we don't know exactly the condition that they're in, but that's something that we will take a look at as we move forward. Also, on the right side of this slide is the amenity space between buildings 1 and 2. In this area, we've provided the pathway that goes through, as well as a couple of seating areas with picnic tables and benches for some amenity space within the site. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, this is a little bit of a collaboration between Craig and I, but we have highlighted in this teal blue color all of the pedestrian connections throughout the site. So as you come off of the main road, you can go along either side of the entranceway. There's pathways along the buildings, as well as a pathway that continues, that's a painted pathway that continues along the main corridor of the site. And we also have a pathway that winds behind buildings 1 and 2 to connect that midpoint amenity space, and also to connect to the back of the site. In the northeast and east side of building 1, we've pulled the retaining wall back a little bit from the building to allow for the planting to be close to the pedestrian walkway, to just allow a little bit more comfort and scale in that area for the pedestrians. I think we can connect to the next slide, and that'll be back to Craig.
Okay. So one of the things that I'd mentioned is you know, the roofscape, and this is kind of just a rough diagram of what we're proposing, so that you can see maybe what that roof treatment might be. But we would be proposing using kind of large river rocks on there, laying some logs across there as well. The river rocks would be in a couple of different colorations, and the idea is to kind of just provide like an abstraction of like a river shoal or like a beach feature with some additions of some large boulders up on the roof. Go to the next slide. Yeah, so I think we've gone over all of this as it is. I think next slide. So yeah, this, as I was mentioning previously with building 3, we incorporated a sloped parapet wall, just so that there would be some sort of kind of visual connection between the residential development that is to the west of this facade. So we added the slope on there to give it more of a residential feel, and then we've added the standing seam metal cladding feature on this as well to provide further connectivity. Next slide, please. So in terms of accommodating uses, one thing that came up over and over again was fitness and brewery. You know, the idea with this business park development is that it needs to provide for a variety of uses that are all compliant within the I-1 zoning bylaw. You know, we think that it could accommodate a brewery or a fitness center adequately, but it also has to be general enough so that it's not specific to one type of business over another. So the other thing is that because of the nature of the site, and that we're looking at more of a small bay development, using LSU size trucks is kind of more appropriate for the site and for the development, rather than using larger semi-articulated trucks and trailers. Next slide, please. Or that might be it. That might be it. 26, yeah. Page 26.
Yeah, I believe that's the last one.
Yeah, that's the last one. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So we will jump right into questions. And just a reminder or a refresh for new members that are here, we have to ask questions first. We'll all go through and then follow that up with any comments. So I'm going to start with Elizabeth, please. Oh, we can't hear you, Elizabeth. I think you're on mute.
That unmute. I wasn't at the last meeting, so you guys might have discussed this, but I was just wondering if there was any on-site stormwater management. And I know that there were comments about trees in the paved area. And I know it's super tight, but I'm kind of curious about the considerations for that, and in particular, stormwater management.
Yeah, so the civil engineer has their drawings haven't been included, and they're not participating today in the ADP, but they've done their design for the site that does include for stormwater management. And it's a requirement for them to do.
Okay, so it'll be managed on site then? There will be,
Yes, yeah.
okay.
That's part of the requirements for stormwater management on site. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Elizabeth, was that your only question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Amy, up next.
Thanks. Hi, thanks for the presentation, Craig. Question, sorry if I missed it, my internet's a bit spotty here. You spoke about incorporating materials from the original industrial site. Is that blue sort of round tower building? Question number one. And then question number two is, in what ways is that going to be incorporated, and is it, you know, a nod to the heritage of the area? Can you just talk a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. So the structural assessment for that particular structure has determined that it's not safe for any public use. So it was kind of proposed recently that, you know, potentially there's the opportunity to reuse or recycle some of the material that might be available in that silo in some way for the landscape features or the amenity features on site. It wouldn't necessarily, you know, speak of the historic nature of the site, it being like a site used for milling and logging, but you know, the best we could do would be to incorporate something that does exist on the site, providing that it's suitable for it, right?
Thanks, that makes sense. Just speaking as the public art representative, it could be a really cool, because I know a lot of people do have a connection to that building and to this site. It might be a really interesting way to create community engagement on the site by reinterpreting some of that material through art, because if it's not structurally sound material, maybe it's not terribly useful. But I saw that you had rocks and boulders.
I'm going to interrupt you just to keep it to questions for now, and then we'll add that to comments at the end.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay, thanks.
Sorry. Is that all? Okay, perfect. Thank you. David Arnott, next up.
Yeah, hi. Could you just reconfirm what the overall length of the building facades are that face the highway? I think I counted 620 feet.
Yeah, you might know off the top of your head right now, as it's probably fresher in your head than it is mine, but in total, yes. I mean, we're looking at 58,000 square feet total, but I mean, it is broken up, right?
Okay, and so with the breaking up, how wide is that little park strip thing?
It's about 30 feet, 30 feet wide.
Okay.
And a lot of
kind
it
of
is obscured from the highway as it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain a little bit more the rationale for the kind of checkerboard cut, like arrangement of colors on the elevation?
So the explanation behind that would be that In our experience, one of the easiest ways to break up kind of a facade in a manageable way is to incorporate reveal lines where you might add strips of color, which would provide some visual interest and kind of break up a facade, which has been noted can be quite monotonous. And this is a typical strategy that's incorporated, at least by myself and other architects I know that work a lot in doing industrial buildings and do them successfully.
Okay. Did you experiment with kind of making the metal more consistent or, continuous?
So the thing is when you're using insulated concrete tilt-up panels, the panels themselves are the building envelope. So incorporating things like standing seam metal panels on top of a concrete facade is kind of like adding, it's almost like applique, right? So if we're going to be doing extensive amounts of that, there's just an extensive cost that is hard to justify, seeing as it's not actually contributing in any way other than what you might consider to be a visual break.
Yeah, I don't have any more questions. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you, David. Kareem?
Yes, thanks again for the presentation. A couple of questions. The first one is regarding parking. Is it difficult to satisfy the number of required parking stalls?
Maybe I don't understand the question. Are you saying that we're underparked or overparked, or what are you saying?
Well, I don't want to start commenting, but I remember we had asked about breaking up the parking at the last presentation, and it seems to me that it hasn't been significantly broken. It's just lots of parking, and I'm wondering, is it because you cannot satisfy the required number of stalls?
Okay, so the parking is broken up by the entrances for overhead doors to the units because all of the units have overhead doors to access them. So the parking is broken up between every unit. And that's one of the things that we've kept consistently from this presentation, from the previous presentation.
Maybe it's a rendering issue, but looking at the plans, I don't, I feel like it's again, it's one continuous, gray asphalt. I don't know if I remember the suggestions being, putting stone pavers or something to break up that, and maybe it is there, but I missed it between the parking stalls.
No, I mean, maybe we missed that comment, but I don't recollect that being on the comments that we got from ADP last time.
Can I jump in quickly?
Sure.
I'm pretty sure that we are very close to right on the parking requirement.
Yeah.
We're not providing a lot of excess parking stalls to my understanding. So I think that it has more to do with providing the right amount of stalls as required rather than not wanting to add in some separation in that parking space, parking area.
Yeah, Jessica's right. We are at about what we need to be for the parking requirements.
It exceeds the requirement by 3 stalls.
Okay. My second question is just based on the first one regarding materials. Has there been any attempt at using anything other than asphalt for paving?
No, not since we last talked on July 8th. No.
Okay. And lastly, but also regarding materials on the building, you mentioned that the walls are tilt-up concrete and all the standing seam and whatever is just basically stuck on top. Am I understanding this correct?
Yeah, you're understanding that correctly. That we have a detail that we use that provides kind of the opportunity for the standing seam metal cladding to stand out as a feature, but it doesn't contribute really to the building envelope or the building assembly in any way, other than it's there to, basically be applique.
I'm not an expert on these concrete walls, but I wonder, are there, in the prefab stage or whatever, is there an opportunity to incorporate different textures to the concrete while it's still wet?
So that's an interesting question, but to incorporate them onto the facades, you would have to treat the slab, because these get cast on top of the slabs. So if you wanted to have some sort of variation that's cast into the fronts of those panels, you would maybe have to treat the slab in a particular way, which might be what you're getting at, and that would just be an immense cost if you're talking about doing something like that.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying. No more questions from me.
Sure.
Thanks, Kareem. Luke?
Hi, thanks. This might be more of a question for the district, but is the district requiring any specific energy performance on this project, other than what's already required?
No, it just has to meet the BC building code when it comes in for building permit.
Okay, thanks. And then a question for the applicant would be, could you speak a bit more towards the rationale for this mid-block plaza that's between building 1 and 2? Is there any rationale behind the location, the sizing, and also a bit more about what its intended use is for?
Okay, so in order for us to break up building 1 from building 2, which was previously one building, the best strategy was to try to make it as much in the middle as possible without disrupting as many of the unit sizes and spacings as possible. Because you may have noted that on the plan that the site causes the buildings to step quite dramatically in some locations. So there was a strategy a little bit in terms of where we located that to not have to adjust too much with the existing site conditions. And then the location that we put it in, because it kind of divides building 1 from building 2, sort of in the middle, kind of made the most sense in terms of providing the best location for a separation. But it also provides a good location for people to go from the center part of the site between, between all of the buildings to access the back. And the back part, I'm going to call it the back, but it's the east side of the site, whereas it approaches kind of the riparian area if you were to move towards the north, with the bouldering of the retaining walls kind of creates like a really nice passageway to access the front of the site along Mill Road. And then in terms of what was designed there, Jessica and I talked for quite a while about, would it be suitable for the addition of trees? What other things could we add and incorporate it to make it more friendly? So there was the addition of like some tables in there, the idea that, if we're going to have like a river shoal idea, perhaps as a roofscape, that we might incorporate that on the ground as well. Jessica, do you have anything you might want to contribute?
I think you've covered all of the points regarding that mid-plaza. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also provided an opportunity for us as well to create kind of another means of a passageway from the buildings on the east side of the site to the building on the west side, or vice versa.
Okay, has any sort of coverage been considered for it? Because I know that was one of the previous comments about covered pedestrian walkways, but I don't see anything on the elevations about any kind of canopy or
Right, so
lighting there.
that canopy would be pretty high up in the air because I'm talking about LSU trucks. And LSU trucks, they can get quite high. So
Sorry, I'm speaking about the
trucks.
mid
Think
block.
about the trucks that are going underneath overpasses on highways, right? Your highway overpasses, they have the little markings on there that says you can't be over 5.98 meters tall. So we wouldn't want trucks to come through there and take it out.
Right, okay. So you're intending on trucks being able to drive through that mid block plaza?
Yeah, that's the way these business parks work. They all have access to overhead doors, and the trucks come in, they back in, they load and unload, and then they exit.
No, I think, I don't
I'm-
think we're intending to have vehicles drive through the walkway between the buildings, Craig, between
Oh, no,
buildings
not
1 and
between
2.
building 1 and 2. No,
No,
not
no.
between there. It's between the two buildings, like,
Between down the midpoint, but not between buildings 1 and 2.
yeah,
In
no.
that plaza, there's no intention for vehicle traffic.
Yeah, sorry, I think maybe I miscommunicated my question there. I was asking if there's any kind of covered area over this plaza between the building 1 and building 2, not bridging where the parking is, obviously.
Okay. So no, we haven't incorporated anything like a covered area in there, but we could.
Okay. And then is there any more detail on the different type of canopies that you've got outside of each entrance? I can see in your elevations that you seem to have a detail that's more of it's a cantilevered metal. However, I see on some of the visuals there is more wood-like elements, maybe some suspended type features. Is there multiple different types of canopies that you're planning on doing? And have you got any more detail on those?
Not for this particular drawing set. But yeah, we have proposed 2 different types of canopies. So on the southeast corner, we've proposed the wood pole with the glass and timber canopies. And throughout the center drive aisle, we've proposed a different type of canopies with a wood finish that comes up the wall, becomes part of the soffit, and then the roofing is kind of trimmed out with a metal flashing, or the canopy is trimmed out with a metal flashing and be a membrane type canopy structure.
And yeah, my last question, sorry, would be to that I'm sorry if this has already been covered by Karim, but yeah, there is a considerable amount of paving in between these. I mean, it's typical of these type of developments, but is there any opportunity to be able to insert some kind of landscaping strip in the parking? I know the district require a certain amount of planting strips in these, but I don't know whether you're meeting that or not. Could you speak to that, please?
So at this time, there isn't, we haven't introduced like any planting strips. Like normally it's, there's 1 planting strip for every 8 parking spaces or something like that. But because the parking spaces are generally only like a few in a row, there wasn't any occasion to do it except for on the west side on the south part of, say, building 3. So along building 3 there, you kind of tuck in, and there's the opportunity for parking where you're facing towards the railroad tracks, where there's another planting feature that ends up meeting it on the corner, and then it tucks into the far south area where there's again more parking spaces up along the retaining wall. But the parking as it's laid out kind of fulfills the intention of the parking bylaw, because it ends up getting broken up without having consistent parking along the facades of building 1, 2, and 3, right where the entrances are.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Luke. Jamie?
Thank you. So I wasn't at the previous presentation to panel, so apologies if any of these questions have been dealt with then. Firstly, I'm just wondering if there was any consideration to varying the actual roof line rather than just, varying the sort of flat parapet condition. I'm just thinking of, the classic sort of sawtooth industrial roof line or roof lines reminiscent of the existing industrial buildings even on the site that have some reference to adjacent surroundings? Was that something that was reviewed, or is it technically too difficult to accomplish?
No, building 3 has introduced that. So we are showing that there's a sloped parapet along building 3. And it's the side that faces the industrial or the residential side.
Yeah, sorry, my question is about sloping. So that is that sloping the top of the tilt-up concrete panel, as in sloping the parapet, and the roof condition is completely flat? But my question was about, you know, the overlook condition. Was there ever a consideration given to having, you know, an actual sloping kind of sawtooth or other roof structure? So rather than flat roof sloping to center drain, that it's a series of sloped roofs or anything like that?
Yeah, so there was not a consideration for doing that at all.
Okay. And then with regard to the proposed roof treatment, I noticed that there's in the slide presentation, there's a kind of sketch plan of the proposed roof treatment. Is that in the package anywhere? Has that been kind of drawn up in detail? It's you know, it's proposed to be quite different, more ambitious than a, you know, gravel ballast. But is there drawing work to, you know, show, or visuals to show how that is intended to appear?
Other than that sketch, no.
Okay. And then lastly, just about pedestrian movement along the building faces. So there's a note about kind of continuous access along building frontage. And I can see it's sort of obviously interrupted and stop and start with loading bays. What kind of condition should someone, you know, what would we expect to see along there? Is it just there's going to be a drop in the concrete sidewalk to, you know, an asphalt loading bay that interrupts it at every point, or is there kind of a matched slope so that you can travel along the front of the buildings without, you know, encountering big changes in level? It's just hard to read from the landscape and architectural plans.
Yeah, so we're not proposing any dramatic changes in grade. We're sloping away from the buildings to prevent water ingress.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's kind of how we're addressing that. So there isn't any major change in elevations, no.
So it'll just be a small kind of slope change, I guess, and changed from concrete to asphalt as you move across between a sort of paved entry and loading dock and paved entry as you go along the building.
Yeah, there's nothing dramatic.
Okay. Yeah, that's it for me.
Can I add to that last one? I think there's also, it's to be noted that we're also proposing to provide a painted pedestrian walkway that would run behind, like kind of through the parking lot, that would allow a smooth transition through that area without any slopes at all. It would be run along the road, and it would be painted to provide more of a continuous pedestrian pathway through that area that would also connect to the crosswalk areas and the pedestrian amenities throughout the site.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And last but not least, Jordan, would you mind just giving us a quick intro about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jordan McCauley. I'm the one of 2 BCSLA representatives on the panel. I work for the Vancouver Park Board as a park planner. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and have the opportunity to share my thoughts with the panel. So I also maybe obviously missed the last time this project appeared, so forgive me as well if I'm asking anything redundant or that's been answered in previous sessions. My first question builds off of Elizabeth's, and I was hoping you could expand a bit on the answer you gave her. So when you say that stormwater is managed on site, do you mean it's done so through infiltration or another best management practice, either in full or in part, or do you mean it's done through the storm system and the entirety or part of that paved area is drained directly to the storm system?
No, because of the asphalt paving, because of the flat roofs, we're draining as much as we can to systems that will be in place. But the intention is that we're managing all of that stormwater on site. We
And
have the
do you-
riparian area to the northeast to consider, right?
Sure. So I'm still not clear. What do you mean? Do you mean it's done through infiltration or it's going to a storm drain?
I believe it's going to storm drains, which is the only way that we could manage it.
I see. Thank you.
I would just expand that we're not planning to include any swales or stormwater management ponds or anything like that. Those are not included at this time.
And was there a reason for that?
The site ended up being with the setbacks kind of restricted the amount of development that could actually happen on the site. So our client is, you know, in the business of developing units so that they could have a business park operate there, and tried to maximize it to the best of our ability.
Okay.
Within the constraints that we had.
Okay. Would there be ability to consider some of the 3 over-provided stalls and using some of that square footage for this purpose?
I suppose it could be considered, yeah.
I would just comment that I'm not sure, we don't have the civil engineer here today, but I'm not sure how much value that would provide.
Yes.
3 parking stalls worth of space would not absorb or treat very much water. But I think we can explore that option and see if we could get anything out of it.
Thank you. And my last question relates to the bike racks within the plaza. Jessica, did you consider any impacts on the surrounding circulation? Like say I had a bike sticking off one direction and then another sticking off the other. So essentially the thing becomes 2 bikes wide. Would that have any disruption on the surrounding circulation? Because I'm wondering if it's a little bit tight in there already.
Yes, that has been considered. The bike racks, the location of them currently is up against a planting bed, and so the option would be, or it would appear that you would only use one side of the bike parking, and there is an allowance for the length of a bike and also a pedestrian pathway. So both of those can fit side by side. And the bike parking should not impede any pedestrian flow.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just gonna try to ask my questions quickly here so we can move to comments. You mentioned that there was the hazard assessment done. Was there a heritage assessment done on that Ilaho building at all?
I don't believe that there was.
Okay. You mentioned a number, like obviously it's a complex site. You've got hog fuel to deal with. You've got geotechnical issues to deal with. You mentioned weight a few times. Have you looked at wood as an alternative to the concrete tilt-up to reduce building weights?
Yes and no, we did. But the determination was that this was going to be the opportunity that provided the greatest success to the project.
Okay. Did you explore within the landscape plan for that, riverscape kind of treatment? Is there opportunity for that to have some sort of water treatment function?
Are you talking for the roofscape?
For the roofscape, yeah, through either sedum or other type of kind of quote unquote green roof that you can add up there?
No, we didn't.
Okay, and one thing that did come up for discussion a little bit on the last meeting was just getting some better imagery of the slope at the rear and the proposed retaining structure. Were you able to produce any drawings to explore that a bit better? I know that there was some on one of the websites that was kind of advertising the development that we found that maybe show that in 3D a bit more. And were you guys able to explore that to bring back to panel?
No, we haven't included that with this presentation, but we have developed the retaining walls that go around the site. But I mean, they've only been developed kind of architecturally as an idea. They haven't been designed to actually be retaining wall.
Okay, that's all I have for questions. Let's jump through to comments and keep it rolling here. So same order, Elizabeth, please.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for your presentation. I think that the plant palette is pretty interesting. Love the native plants in there. Might need a little bit of work with sunshade considerations with the fescues and the ferns kind of planted fairly close together in some locations. And then I don't know. I know it's a really tight site, and I know that you have parking requirements to meet, but that's a lot of roof area and a lot of pavement and a lot of water that's going to be coming off of this site into a stormwater system that is probably going to be challenged in the coming years. So I think it is quite important to start to try to deal with some of that stormwater on site if possible. And I think a green roof would probably be more valuable. I like the shoal idea, but just in consideration of heat and stormwater again, I think a green roof would be interesting to see. And also the bike parking location, I think, would be more useful if it was incorporated into the buildings a little closer to somebody's destination, so that they're not parking their bike at the entrance and then having to walk through. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you,
So
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, for the bike parking, one of the interesting things that we find with
Craig,
these types of
sorry to
buildings-
interrupt you, sir. It's not really time to respond. I think with
Sorry,
this, we
my
just go through
apologies.
comments. Yep.
Yep.
All good. Amy?
Hi, thanks. Thanks for catching me earlier with launching into comments, Carlos. Yeah, Craig, just a note that I think there's some really interesting opportunities with the old blue building there in terms of creating some of the, I think, visual interest that you're looking to create with the boulders and the logs. And there's some really amazing woodworking artists in Squamish that could potentially help to create some engaging aspects of the site. Thanks.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, well, we were really close last time to voting this as a D in July, but we kind of understood, well, we felt it was understood that kind of the gravity and the concern that the panel had for the development, that the kind of comments had been communicated sufficiently. So personally, I was expecting a kind of really big change when we saw this application. Can't honestly say that it's different from the previous one. I think the patchwork of colors are very 1980s. I think the patchwork makes the 600-foot plus length of wall look incredibly busy. I don't think it breaks it up in the way that you're describing. I think the addition of the metal seems to be a kind of throwaway. It isn't, I believe, integrated. Just adds a further element to an already busy facade. The mid-block plaza, again, seems to be kind of an idea to placate the panel. It's a 20-foot gap on a 600-foot facade. I think fundamentally the problem is it's just the overall massing and the team resigning themselves to use concrete is kind of put you into this corner, and that there's seemingly no easy ways to beautify a concrete building. I don't believe it references the neighborhood development at all. I can't see that from the elevations. I don't believe the buildings are sufficiently different to encourage wayfinding or communicate that. I can't tell the difference between most of the buildings. DPA3 asks for a wide range of high quality and visually appealing cladding and materials. I don't believe it meets those guidelines. DPA3 also asks that the buildings differ in color and architectural treatments. I don't believe it sufficiently meets that. And just similar to the extensive comments we gave you last time, this is a gateway site into Squamish and needs to align much more accurately with the DPA guidelines, unfortunately. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Kareem?
Yes, I believe David has summed up very well a lot of what I wanted to say. I want to reiterate that his point about not feeling that enough was done since the last presentation, unfortunately. I think there's a sea of asphalt there. It's quite relentless, and there was an opportunity to maybe include grass pavers or stone pavers or whatever that maybe will help with stormwater, but also will, you know, add some texture to that just big gray canvas between the buildings. I agree that while the buildings look slightly more interesting than the previous version, I don't see them as different enough. There was the one slide with building 1, building 2, building 3, and the differences were very minor, I believe. Maybe if more color was injected into them, that would have helped. You know, it's not my place to say this, but I don't know if the choice of material as the concrete tilt-up has kind of you know, you chose the material and it's limited all these different, like you don't want to put cladding on top of it because it's extra cost. You can't color it because it's extra cost. You can't, like, it's all these sort of prohibitive factors because of that one material choice. I believe we spoke about, and I understand the business side of this, and I don't want to go too long here, but while it's not supposed to be just for breweries and gyms, I believe we did speak about opportunities for seating, and if there was a brewery, there would be spill out and a place for you know, picnic tables to be put in between those parking stalls. I personally would support a variance on the number of stalls if it gets to that. Like, I would rather see less stalls if it means you know, more seating and more trees in between the stalls, perhaps where the grouped entries are or something. I'm gonna leave it at that, but thank you.
Thanks, Kareem. Luke?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to support Kareem and David on the comments that they've just made. It does seem somewhat that we're trying to graft a concrete tilt-up building into something that it's not necessarily intended, or it could have a better use for. It wouldn't be better to have a more diverse sort of application of materials. It'd be nice to see some sort of board form finish on the concrete, but if that's not an option because of the cost, and there is also not an option with cost because of inefficiencies, sorry, for corrugated metal siding or anything like that, then potentially a better exploration of mass timber might be a better use or an application for this site, especially if the foundations are an issue on this one. I will leave that one at that. But in terms of site planning, the way that the mid-block plaza is it's a nice gesture in a way. However, I think that there could be, there's a lot more to explore there in terms of what it actually would be used for. It seems to have just been put in there to break up the two buildings, which is a step in the right direction. But we need to see the program in this. You know, can the uses of building 1 and building 2 spill out into this space to actually use it? There's currently no overhead doors or glazing in here. There's no coverage for people to actually use it. The amount of rain we get in Squamish and that we've all seen recently, no one would be using that space. And then as we move into night, there's no lighting. It would be nice to see some sort of lighting plan for there, because that could be a particularly dangerous area in an evening, especially since there's only one exit out of the site at the moment. There could be opportunity to explore, or I'd like to see the buildings maybe moved further apart to make this space more usable, and perhaps put the bike spaces in there. It is a central spot in the middle of the site. So I think there's some actual site planning exercises to be explored there. And then moving from that mid-block plaza, also an investigation into pedestrian circulation. I don't think bringing people between the backs of parking stalls and drive aisles is necessarily a great thing. I understand why it's done because of the loading bays. And again, I understand why there's no coverage there because of the loading bays. However, people love to just to back out without looking, and there's nothing worse than getting hit by a car. So I think that maybe there's better ways to explore how pedestrians can circulate around that site, and maybe they do come around the back of the building and can actually see part of the vegetation that's to the east, and they can actually come around and use that mid-block plaza. And then again, the amount of paving and building area that's on this site. I understand that planting boulevards aren't necessarily an efficient use in this instance, especially when we're so close to the parking count. However, an exploration into permeable pavers might be a good application on this site. In terms of the actual aesthetic of the building, moving with the roof slope to better reflect sea to sky is also a step in the right direction. However, it would be interesting to see that more explored across building 1 and 2. Maybe it becomes a bit more diverse and maybe it's a bit further accentuated. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Jamie?
Yeah, so just reviewing the meeting minutes to prepare for it, I certainly expected significantly more differentiation between what was presented in July and what we see today. I think, you know, it's a prominent site, but in terms of architectural quality, it's, you know, treated like a very peripheral industrial development. But I think, you know, it's got significant overlook from the highway. From my experience, you know, I think it's your first real glimpse into downtown Squamish and new Sea to Sky development, and I think it's more prominent than some of the photo slides might suggest. And I think your impression of this is going to be, you know, apart from the condition at ground, is a pretty relentless kind of flat roof condition. I think the choice of tilt-up concrete, it's, you know, it is a choice of material, and I don't think it's a kind of an excuse to lower standards for general architectural quality, neighborhood fit, and so on. So I think that might be potentially the source, along with some of the massing issues, the source of the problem was really integrating it into its surroundings. The amount of obviously hard paving and asphalt is, you know, it's pretty extensive. It seems to be, you know, very little space left for any sort of outdoor human activity at all, whether it's walking or kind of spending time outside socializing. I think in reality, we see, you know, these kind of light industrial projects in Squamish generally have a pretty good mix of, you know, food and beverage and sort of assembly type occupancies, fitness classes, things like that. So the reality of what this, you know, the kind of activities it's trying to support is not really represented on the site planning. Some of the kind of smaller elements, I think, you know, again, as Elizabeth mentioned, the bike parking location is very peripheral. I think it's, you know, kind of poorly sited in terms of passive surveillance. If you're going to be going in to do fitness class or spend a couple of hours in a brewery, you know, it's completely in a neglected corner, and I wouldn't really feel great about leaving my bike of any sort of cost out so far out of sight. Then, as Luke mentioned, the painted pedestrian pathway behind reversing cars, I think, it's almost worse than not painting it in. I think at a minimum, you need to, you know, delineate pedestrian movement with a change in surface and a noticeable surface change you can feel as you drive over it. But I think, yeah, there are bigger issues to do with the sort of or the concrete structural expression being sort of the only the only material, and then the sort of extent of hard surfacing, fairly relentless massing that are, you know, more important than some of the smaller elements. Just one last comment. I think all of the public amenity areas, I really doubt their usefulness. They're all shaded north-facing areas really tightly hemmed in between completely opaque building facades and parked cars. I really question whether anyone is going to go, you know, at any time of year to spend any time sitting in areas like that. And I think they just look kind of mean in their scale and location and just purely, you know, about squeezing it into unresolvable little corners. Yeah, that's about it for my comments.
Thank you. Jordan?
Thank you. Yeah, I think most significantly, if this amount of uninterrupted impervious surface, both on the roof and on the ground plane, is proposed, I think there's an imperative to explore some best practices for infiltration and stormwater management on site, meaning not discharge to a storm drain immediately. So I think that definitely needs to be explored, especially because it's close, but there is an over provision of parking in that it exceeds policy by 3 stalls, so there is some space. And I also like the suggestion of a green roof if possible. And then next, I agree with Elizabeth and now Jamie that the bike racks need to be reconsidered in their location. I think not only is it out of the way, what's proposed now is a little bit circuitous in that you have to kind of walk your bike down this pathway to access them, and then it's immediately beside the picnic table, so there's some possibility for conflict there. Otherwise, I agree with the prior comments on the open space and site plan, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's me, I guess. So thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I'll have to agree with a lot of what's been said thus far. I think last time the general comment was that, you know, it was significant in its massing and we were looking for something a bit different and something more reflective of its gateway location. Partly, you know, to put my developer hat on, there are guidelines that you are, you know, according to the report, largely meeting. There is a zoning which is flexible, and, you know, we're saying fitness studios and breweries because we live in Squamish and we know exactly what's going to go there, but the response that we might not go there is also very true. I think given the response, this looks like a project that's kind of up against some constraints, and so I don't know how this moves forward, but if it goes a different direction, I would say that this is one of those areas that I know I certainly would, and I can't speak for the other panel members, but would encourage looking at it with a rezoning to maybe go vertical with some of that density. So you're still getting you know, as much FAR or more, but perhaps providing that circulation that's going to make these different uses and maybe additional uses that are more lucrative acceptable for the site, because I think it just is hitting them. It's missing the mark on what could be done on the site. So I'll leave it at that. And so I'll read out. Is there anything else? Just going back to panel. Kareem, you got your hand up.
Yep, just one last comment here. I think you know, a few of us have mentioned the BOSA property, the BOSA development adjacent to your property, and I think that should be taken into consideration. You know, once it's fully built, you've got something like 1,000 units in there between townhomes and apartments and so on, and I'm sure there's a business case there to be made for the types of businesses that might go into your development. I know, you know, obviously, you know, you have a client and they have their own vision for the project, but maybe it's worth exploring investing a little more in materials and sort of site layouts and so on. Because you will get that sort of return on investment with, you know, hopefully a very walkable, very pedestrian friendly, very user friendly project at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll read the potential recommendations out here. They are as follows. A, that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and does not need to see this project returned for further review. B, that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. C, that the advisory design panel supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to resolve the following recommendations and return to present the revised project to advisory design panel. And D, that the advisory design panel does not support the project as presented for the following reasons. Or discussion with the
Can I
panel.
just have a little bit of discussion with everyone? I just wanted to bring something up that, you know, A, B, C all starts with the advisory design panel supports the project. And that's when I read the previous minutes, it kind of might be misleading that we supported the project. We were very clear that there was lots of elements we didn't support. So I'd just like to discuss if anyone has any strong feelings about the wording there, or how we, you know, incentivize the applicant and the owner group to really make considered change in this.
Yeah, I would. I don't have any particular strong feelings whether it would be does or don't support, but I think we've definitely voiced our opinion that based on your comments from the previous ADP, which I also wasn't part of, I was surprised to see when I saw the original submission how little had changed, and as long as the applicant is aware that something considerable needs to change, then I think C, I would be okay with C. I can put that forward.
I think I would be okay with C too, as long as, you know, we did see some considerable change, but I don't support this project because it seems like it's kind of business as usual. And I think we're moving into a period of time and in Squamish where we need to see something new, and we need to see something that really showcases what Squamish could be, especially, you know, in a time of extreme weather events and period when we want to start seeing adaptation to climate change. So
Yeah,
that's what I would like to see.
I'd agree. I guess my point was more around that, you know, we really did impress that we wanted to see significant change the last time, and we hoped the applicant did take into consideration. And so we did say C, because it kind of always, as design professionals all ourselves, no one wants to get a D, but nothing changed. So, well, not, you know, subjectively to me, nothing changed. So, but I'll happily go with others' votes. So, yeah.
I have a question for David, since we're discussing, are you proposing that the wording, moving forward, we change the four options to say, you know, either A essentially would be supporting, but B, C, and D would be not supporting, and then, you know, with the different conditions? Is that what you're...
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that it's sometimes misleading to people who read the minutes as a third party or a latecomer or even the general public that the ADP supported the previous version of the plans and would like the applicant to work on. When I think the general sentiment was no one supported the actual application as it was. We wanted to see significant change. If we're going to go down that same road again and rely on the applicant to come back with a radically different solution, and it's not kind of written down that way, it's again misleading, you know, because if we vote for C, the advisory design panel supports this project, but would like them to work on the following. It's just a little bit of semantics. I don't know what the right answer is, and I'm not trying to lead us to one or the other thing. I want to vote C personally, but if it's not radically changed, we're just going to see this again in many more months' time, and so yeah.
Should we do a straw poll?
I support C as well, if that helps, Carlos.
Yeah, I would. I'll suggest this. Let's see it. Let's do it. Does someone want to move C? Reem, there's a seconder. Luke, does anyone oppose? Okay, so it looks like C is yet again the recommendation. I think there are a pretty significant list of recommendations that need to be resolved. I don't know that they differ too much from the previous ones. Is there anything that panel members would like to be identified directly in this resolution? Or should we just refer to the minutes?
As long as it's being caught in the minutes, I would like something to do with the site planning itself to be caught in there, particularly to do with pedestrian circulation and the location of the mid-block plaza. I keep calling it mid-block plaza, sorry, like the walkthrough. The you know what I
walkthrough.
mean? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I think we can leave it at that and end that item. Thank you very much for your time. So we do have Jonas coming up. It is 3:30. Do we want to just jump right into this, or should we take a break? I personally am okay to jump right into it, but
I'm happy to go into it.
okay. Jonas,
May-
can I get you? Sorry, go ahead, David.
Sorry, may I just ask to be excused? Can I leave the meeting now?
You know what? Let's just take 5. Let's just reconvene at 3:36. Or do you have to
Okay.
leave for good, David?
I have to leave for good, sorry.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Cancel that. If you have to leave,
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
I've
As
seen this a
do
few
I.
times.
Thanks,
Okay, Jonas.
everybody.
If everyone's all right with this, I'd say take it away.
Okay, thanks, Carlos. I'll try to be quick. I need maybe the facilitator can pass me the sharing function. There we go.
Is this related to the project? Or is this?
It
are
is
we
not.
moving
No,
on?
the applicants can now leave for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Can the panel see it?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So thanks so much. Today's purpose for this presentation is to go over the roles and responsibilities of ADP. And we'll do a bit of a focus on development permit areas, since that's the majority of what the stage at which the ADP sees applications come through. There we go. So in terms of ADP role, there's 3 main responsibilities in the District of Squamish. Again, every jurisdiction may be a little different. The main responsibilities advise on development proposals during their review. So today was a great example of that. It's mostly development permits. In some cases, it will be rezoning applications, advise on district policies and development. So when district drafts certain policies, such as development permit area guidelines or revises development permit area guidelines, we certainly make a trip, at least one trip to ADP. And less often, we will bring municipal projects that have some kind of a former character or large pedestrian aspect to it for ADP to review as well. Important to note that the ADP has no approval authority, so it is an advisory body. Today's project was a good example how a project can go through a number of cycles in the review process in the ADP. And sometimes, if there's not good rationale, unlike today, the project might move forward without ADP's support in the end. So I'm going to focus on development proposals and DPA guidelines. And just one thing, actually, I'll say before I depart this slide is sometimes it feels like the projects are half-baked when they come to ADP. And we get sometimes questions, how did this project make it this far? And that is the purpose of ADP. The projects, a lot of them that come through, they're not in their final stage. We negotiate and push the application at the staff level with the applicants. And then at some points we get to the point where the applicant, I think what happened today, thinks that, you know, they're good with the direction they've been given, and this is what the sort of limit of their compromise is. And we are obliged to bring it back to ADP for another review.
Can I just jump in on that? Like,
Yeah.
and today's was a good example. I sometimes struggle with the issue that if you look at Brian's report, a lot of the design guidelines, it says meets guideline. I think actually there's none that say that it does not meet guideline. And so some of this then becomes our opinion on design, which often goes far beyond what's actually required of developers, which again, from the developer side can be quite frustrating if you're sitting on that side of the chair. But I guess, like, where does staff see our role, and where should the cutoff be for that role in providing comments over and above what's actually required through guidelines? Because ultimately some of our comments are identifying a failure or a hole in existing guidelines and our expectations. And partly some of that isn't the fault of the person that purchased the property 2 years ago and have been working for a bunch of years on this plan. So
Yeah, that's a good question. So the district is limited by what's in the guidelines in terms of assessing the project. ADP quite often, you know, explores aspects of development that are not perhaps captured in the guidelines, and that's fine, as long as at the end of the day, you know, you're not asking for the project to come back for some reason that is not, you cannot pin it on it not meeting the guideline. And if ADP has a different interpretation than what you see in the report, you know, if the report says meets guidelines, but members in the ADP feel that it doesn't, then certainly call that out. You know, we are here to hear the collective advice from the ADP, and you know, we're not always right as well. And you know, the scrutiny that is given at this stage when we go to ADP is not the same as what we would do when we're going to council. So if you see something that you don't think is right, call it out, and it sometimes might be the case.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of DPA guidelines for those you know, that have not seen a lot of development permits or have had to deal with those, the applications that come to ADP, they're mostly form and character. So in terms of the extent of those guidelines, you know, we're dealing with exterior materials, textures and colors, landscape, signage and lighting, site layout, accessibility, greenhouse gas reductions through exterior design. So it's really important that the ADP's focus is what's happening outside and not what is happening inside the building, unless that somehow affects what is happening outside. So we can have in the question period, we can ask questions about that, but ideally, we, as an ADP, we don't make comments around what is happening inside the building. And I think this ADP has been pretty good at sticking to that principle. And then also interpretation of DP guidelines. So we, you know, if you do, like I said, see something that you don't think meets a guideline, please call it out. And as I mentioned previously, sometimes we will bring larger rezoning applications. So the ADP will see a project at rezoning, sometimes more than once, and then it comes back at DP level as well. And at the rezoning stage, we kind of focus on the site layout portion of it, because that often is captured in the zone. So some background on the development permit areas that we have now. They were developed in 2017. It was an iterative process, getting feedback from the planning team on guidelines of the day, working with the ADP, reviewing community input we gathered through the engagement process on this new official community plan that we have now, and looking at other local government practices. Because there were many problems with the previous guidelines, which tended to be really general, we ended up with a comprehensive list of guidelines, not wanting to miss a key issue. That, you know, a lot of issues have popped up over the years in terms of our previous guidelines, and I'm not saying that these guidelines don't have issues either. The idea was that we will apply those guidelines generally. So we came up with a really specific list of guidelines that we have now, but that means that we have to have some more flexibility as opposed to having a general list of guidelines. It is also important to note that in 2017, when these guidelines were drafted, we were not in a climate emergency. I think if we were drafting the official community plan today, the guidelines might look quite a bit different. So just there's a number of issues that have popped up since these guidelines have been drafted, which is not that long ago. That shows you how fast the issues can pop up, and it's hard to keep the policy work up to date. We are getting ready to review the form and character guidelines likely next year. So it won't be a complete rewrite, but we will be making a trip to ADP on that. Guidelines are essentially a set of policies that guide very specific development applications. Implementation can seem messy. So staff work with the applicants extensively on reviewing applications using some judgment, but also heavily relying on the applicant's professionals for certain aspects such as code and architectural articulation, relying on applicants to understand what the economic limitations of the project are. Sometimes not applying a guideline is as simple as the project is too small for a particular application. So there's no formula that can be simply applied, as is the case with zoning bylaw regulations. These are regulations, and what we're dealing with is guidelines. There's lots of areas for contradiction between guidelines, zoning requirements, floodproofing requirements, building code, step code, and other policies. So we have to take this balanced approach, assuming that the regulations don't always speak to each other. The world doesn't stop. There are new issues popping up constantly that we need to be adapting while we're testing these set of guidelines, particularly in the downtown area where we need employment space, public open space, protect important views, affordable housing, high quality design, shift to renewable energy. An effective way of navigating the development permit review process requires reflecting on the objective of that development permit area. So every development permit area has an objective in the official community plan. Flexibility, so applying some common sense and what guidelines are not applicable, and adaptability, which is juggling these other competing factors. And this is just a list of the form and character categories. And we've tried to score them, in terms of where is the flexibility needed. I'm happy to share this presentation with the panel. I can send it along. Our council members have said that this is a useful reference guide in terms of, when they're reviewing a project in council, where does that flexibility, where can we be pretty firm on the guidelines and where we have to apply medium to high level of flexibility. This is it. Thank you.
I got a question for you, Jonas.
Sure.
Shading.
Yes.
Shading is in the high priority section. And if I'm honest with you, it seems like a bit of this catch-all that I'll say that opinion. Basically, when we're looking at developments in, say, the downtown, where we want to densify and we want to be 6 stories plus, shading always comes across as like, well, hey, this is going to cast shade. What can you do? And it's like, yeah, it's a taller building. I don't know what the panelists think about this. I have my own feelings about this, but it seems like one of those things that only got brought up if there's some pushback, and then, oh, well, you need to look at the shading. but otherwise, shouldn't we want to have like taller buildings, and that's going to cast shadows on adjacent buildings?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you maybe this red zone is where you have to apply high level of flexibility.
Okay, sorry, yes. I was looking at it as priority. Sorry.
No, this is kind of like a danger scale for
gotcha.
For decision making. Red means you have to be super flexible.
Understood. Okay. Is there any other one, like anyone alone on this one?
Yeah, Carlos, is that something you encounter a lot in Squamish? Because it's something I constantly deal with, being responsible for advocating for parks and open space. So on the flip side, we're constantly getting towers that are proposing to shadow parks within Vancouver, and becomes a matter of sculpting, of sacrificing height, and like sometimes we lose and we accept shade on open space that can be less than ideal. So it's these values that have come into conflict with each other, in the densifying urban environment. So
And I think that's exactly it. It's just, it's where your head is at the time when looking at these permits and thinking, there are benefits to both, I guess. And so all for thoughtful design. I think that's what kind of this panel is meant to do. But I just find it funny that I think the reality is we're going to have more shaded spots in the downtown Squamish area in the future.
Yeah, but luckily, I mean, we don't have towers. Our towers are 6, maybe 8 stories high. So it's usually there is some kind of a compromise where, yes, you can't expect that an open space will have no shade whatsoever. But it's rare that it, is completely shaded out.
is there any policy that protects certain hours, like cannot shade between this and this hours at this and this time of year, like equinox, solstice?
We're working on that on a policy. So it's specific to downtown. We're looking at important public spaces and coming up with specific standards for those. So not at this point, but we're working on it.
Honest, is there ever the ability to vary the requirements by project type? Because shade for one site is good daylight for another building, and for the proposed building in some cases. So if it's a affordable housing project adjacent to shading commercial area, does it get is it treating all proposed buildings the same just based on mass, or is there some push and pull depending on the benefit to incoming people? Or
I think so. Like I said, we don't have specific rules and guidelines around it, but when we do consider shading, definitely we consider what is the use that will be shaded, rather than the just a space or a building. So certainly, what is happening in that building that will have shade effect, then we would consider that for sure.
Yeah, I have a question that's not related to shade. You guys done? I noticed last time, so I think in our first meeting, I went on about different plants and it is one of the guidelines to have drought tolerant plants and plants that are appropriate to site, but and I don't expect it to be detailed because that would be ridiculous, but I wonder if like some of the comments that we had made weren't in the recommendations for like things that the applicant had to come back with having addressed. Some of it was like spacing, trees too close to the buildings, inappropriate plant use in particular places. So I'm just wondering, like, what do you want to see in terms of comments, like for plant materials and general, I guess, landscape planning. And I think part of that was that stormwater. There was a stormwater treatment in one of the last developments too, and we'd kind of commented on that, but I don't think it was included in the recommendations either.
So the planners will take detailed notes and work from that, and so having specific recommendations like planting, specific plants are very useful for us. It doesn't always make it into the minutes. We try to keep the minutes a little more general. So maybe that is the case, but I would say generally, if you have, if you're an expert in that field and you have some comments, specific comments, those are very useful for us.
Good to know. Okay. I just was wondering if it's useful or not. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to spend time doing that because, I love it. But I just want to make sure that it's going to be something that you guys are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question just about the sort of line between exterior and interior considerations for exterior space and interior space. So I answered a call from the AIBC for an architect with experience design for climate change. So I kind of look at the proposed buildings through that lens. And one issue which is related to, you know, with the way we should be building better and climate adaptation is about excess heat and overheating of dwelling units. And it's something that, you know, if you see a building with, you know, single loaded apartment facing south and no exterior shading on a window, it's likely that the building permit application won't pick that up in terms of, you know, unless it's a BC Housing funded project or something, that it won't be subject to an overheating target. And, you know, last ADP, it's early in the project, but there was a sense that there wasn't going to be additional shading and it's not going to get mechanical cooling, and it just looks like a huge red light to me. But it's to do with interior occupant comfort. Can become a very serious health issue, as we saw this summer. But it's a kind of an interior condition that's created because of the way the building is sited and its you know, amount of glass, and but it can also be solved by a mechanical system a little bit in some cases. So it's a kind of partly interior, partly exterior question.
Yeah. So I know that the building code, or maybe the Building Act, prevents the development permit process from dealing with mechanical building issues.
Yep.
But we do have some guidelines around shading over windows. So I think like perhaps focusing comments and questions on you know, the exterior portions of the building that affect overheating would be the way to go.
Yeah. Because all
And I
the
mean,
sort of passive solutions to it are kind of exterior things, you know, deciduous trees, exterior window shading. So that fits quite neatly in with the ADP. But you could get a comment back from them that just says, actually, we're going to deal with it just with a mechanical system, and that'll be in the BP drawing. So then the conversation kind of stops.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
Well, I
it
think
can
that
go either way, basically.
that's a good point. I think normally how we deal with, you know, if it was, let's say, a zoning variance and somebody wants a relaxation of one provision, because they are proposing something else, we would normally secure that in a covenant. So in this case, if somebody, you know, the response from the applicant would be, well, we're not shading windows because we've got a mechanical solution. You know, we could then secure that because essentially we were asked to waive a guideline with rationale. We could potentially secure that as a covenant for the mechanical system, which would then get captured at the building permit stage.
Okay. Can I find the window shading guidelines on the website at the moment?
Yes, they will be, I think they will be part of our DPA 3, which is the residential DPA.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Just for discussion of bigger picture, and you know, this just might not be our role at all here. I'm interested in, just let me talk for a second. I'm interested in kind of knowing where we can push the boundaries, maybe. Like, so for instance, for the mixed use application last time, you know, there was lots of site constraints over by Brennan Park, and there was multiple grades that were tricky to develop, or tricky to use, and then multiple zoning, and I think partially like what we saw in this last development is that, you know, it was the site planning that just really wasn't working out, that contributed to a site that, you know, maybe wasn't that user friendly in the end. So just because I'm not making very good sense, I'm not going to mince words, but it was kind of like putting a band-aid on something that maybe, you know, needed a complete overhaul. And so, you know, what kind of boundaries do we have here in terms of being able, what's our role in terms of being able to push that site overhaul or ask questions about I mean, I know our role isn't zoning, but does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ADP's role includes site layout, and I'm just looking at this reference guide in terms of flexibility for site layout. There's too many in here. Anyways, I think that's a good point. And I think that you can be pushy about that, as long as the kind of following that direction would still result in what's the right word for this? Decent utilization of the site. So yeah, you might have to lose a few bays in the, like in this case, you might have to lose some of the buildable area to make the changes. There's other cases when the site layout sort of gets secured in zoning, which may be the one you're referring to previously on Centennial Way. So when that happens, at development permit stage, it's really hard to ask the applicant to now redesign the site essentially. But I think in today's case, that's a legitimate comment, as long as it doesn't have a huge blow to the proposal.
So in a situation like today, it would be appropriate or okay for us to suggest that maybe they lose a few units in order to have
Absolutely.
open space.
Yeah.
I was really appreciating David's comments today.
Carlos, what do you think about that from a sort of development point of view? ADP comments about, because there's obviously the knock-on effect. That's a tight site, but that's a tight site for X amount of square footage and the associated parking. And if you decide you're not going to build any less than that, there's just no room left for anything. Like there's no room for so many elements we talked about today.
Yeah, and that's the toughest part about that application. Like if that application had come to council 15 years ago, it would be celebrated because it was 100% employment and anything would fly. I think we've seen that with a lot of the industrial park, but at the same time, like I have to sit here and think that there's actually a ton of opportunity on that site that already is complicated with a ton of constraints. And it's like, I think the point that they're adjacent to Waterfront Landing and all the people that are going to live there and it's walkable is that, yeah, like if I was looking at that site, I would look at it for maybe the less industrial portions of the light industrial zone, which I know is another problem that we have, but it kind of is what it is in that zone. And locally that has pumped the price up per square foot of what people are willing to rent those buildings for. And so I think with a little thought, you could actually get a better return on that site. But at the same time, it's tough because they purchased the site at a certain point. They put this plan together and it's based on the guidelines. And a lot of the stuff we are asking for is well and truly extras. And so that's why that it becomes a bit of it identifies a bit of I don't want to say a failure, but it's the guidelines are slow to catch up with those expectations. And that's just the nature of all guidelines. And they're by nature, they're open for interpretation. But yeah, if I had my druthers, there would be proactive zoning for employment and it'd be bonus densities and parking reductions and all the rest of it. But we don't live in that world. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I see it from both sides. I think that I think the role of this panel should be to push for better designs for our town to kind of elevate that, especially on key sites like that are accessed and viewed from the highway. I think that kind of needs to be our role. If I was on the other side of the fence, I would well and truly be pissed off probably, but I also may not have gone into this site picking that type of layout. So.
Yeah, and then I suppose there's things like the stormwater management that can all of a sudden take like a huge jump forward in how important it seems because of like what's happened this week, and obviously the guidelines surrounding things are going to lag behind that. Like the public consciousness about having a site that's 90% impermeable, what that feels like now is very different to 12 months ago.
Jamie, wait until we do
guidelines
one.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Wait until we do one after a snowfall in Squamish. They'll get all the questions will be, where's your snow storage? And then come summer, no one remembers that. The question is, where's your air conditioning? Yeah, it's something we have to watch out for sure.
But I mean, to play devil's advocate, we do live in the Pacific Northwest in the rainforest, and we have been looking at rainwater, stormwater management for 40 years. And it's, it's not rocket science anymore. And there are lots of measures that we could be taking. It does say it meets the guideline, and he said, oh yes, we are doing on-site stormwater management, but they're not. So, I think like Vancouver has pushed that guideline pretty strongly in the last 20 years. I guess, Squamish needs to just catch up a little bit because we haven't had to, right? We have ditches still and no sidewalks, which is great in a way, but just like the industrial section down North Yards, there's tons of paving there, and yes, they have kind of started to do some on-site stormwater management, but a lot of it's still flowing into the stormwater system. So I think it's a pretty key thing, especially since how high we saw the rivers go.
Yeah, I would agree. I think since we drafted these guidelines in 2017, wildfire, storms, climate change, that would definitely influence how we draft guidelines today.
And just, I will play my own devil's advocate here, and it's something that I hate to bring up in these types of conversations, but it's also, you add these additional requirements, you add a green roof, you add air conditioning, you add a step 4 requirement or step 5 requirement that increases the cost of construction. None of that's making leases cheaper for commercial buildings or rent cheaper for people that want to live here. And so it is this very tough balance. And I think all of us that work in this field are balancing that the whole time. But I think it's just something we should be cognizant of, and not to say that anyone should get a break necessarily, but it does have to factor in that like all of these extras get paid for by whomever purchases or leases the units.
So, and this might be beleaguering your point, but is there an opportunity to say, okay, well, let's not consider it an extra. Let's rework the site so that maybe we don't have to pay for air conditioning, so that we can have more green infrastructure, and so that it's, maybe. And I think I'm obviously quite naive in what's required in terms of architectural, mechanical insides, but we just don't see a lot of that real site consideration yet for developments, and I think you guys are great to ask questions about whether to put concrete panels are the right consideration. But, like, are those huge buildings the right consideration? Are huge industrial flat-roofed concrete buildings the right consideration for how we want to see our industrial sites now? And maybe that's just pushing it too far at this point. But, can we ask developers to say, okay, like we're moving into unprecedented times. Can we start to innovate a little bit and look at how we can do things a little bit differently so it's not so expensive to build, and just rework things a little bit?
Yeah, I think from the staff perspective, one thing we're prioritizing in the district at the moment is employment space. We want to maximize the production of employment space so that we can solve the other issue of people having to commute to the city for jobs, which also has all kinds of impacts. But I agree with you, that doesn't mean that employment space has no standard. So I think we have to like incrementally move the dial on it rather than just say, well, we're just going to be like the city of Vancouver now and be very progressive on some of these things. So that's and as Carlos said, the more we move the dial, the more expensive the space becomes, the less of it gets produced. So it's a tricky balance, I think.
maybe to fill the silence. I think for a site like that, they had a fair amount of peripheral landscape that maybe with some creative grading and notching out a curb or two, they could actually get a decent amount of infiltration. Oh, sorry, that's Amazon, but where's I going with this? Yeah, it just seemed like they needed to be coaxed to actually explore it. Like it didn't sound like they had gone very far down that road at all. And like all a rain garden really has to be is a low point with maybe an overflow drain. It doesn't have to be this big sophisticated piece of unheard of technology. So I mean, giving them that push to explore this a little bit further, I think was good. And like maybe they have some of that space around the edges and with that natural slope to the site to actually get a little bit further along.
Yeah, I think today was not a great example of what a project should look like.
It's my first one here, so it can only, maybe it'll only go up from here. But.
I'm glad you guys thought so too, because when I saw that, I was kind of, I don't want to be that person, but.
I mean, I think today was maybe, there was a lot of things that were just lacking effort from the design team rather than, you know, the panel asking for things that are a definite cost add-on. There was just a kind of assumption that we don't need to do, you know, it's definitely tilt-up concrete. So anything beyond that is a kind of an add-on, which is true. It's definitely superficial, but the assumption that it will definitely be tilt-up concrete because the last 20 years it's been tilt-up concrete is not necessarily imposing a cost on the project. It's just asking them to consider alternatives. And it just looked like a lack of ambition.
Yeah, that site has a lot of potential that's unfortunately not explored in different ways, not just you know, stormwater and everything we spoke about, but like they're not capitalizing on the location and their proximity to this huge development, the BOSA's development, and so many other things.
Could I ask I guess it's a question more about the culture of this panel. Like I've been on the staff side in Vancouver, and like, yeah, to not support a project is a big deal. And like, I'm sensing that's the case here, to like send it away with that D label on it. So maybe under what circumstances would we go there, or has this panel gone there in the past, so I can get some perspective on that? Like, is this as far as we get towards D, or does it often actually extend that far?
I would say historically on my last 3 or 4 years, there's been very few, maybe none, that have received the D. And even then I would say there's a lot, we've probably trended more towards option C lately than we had in the last few years. I think we've more often than not selected B with a list of comments for staff to work through, as opposed to C for them coming back to panel. I know in some jurisdictions, C is kind of the typical, you don't get by the first time without C. That this hasn't been that type of panel. But who knows?
I have a quick question for Jonas. Is there precedent, or is there, I don't know, like could you nudge an applicant to consider rezoning from the beginning and say, like, you've got, you know, for example, this site here, we really think you should apply for rezoning instead of going with, you know, again, another very standard, you know, industrial park that could be anywhere.
Yeah, I think we have had those discussions with the applicant or made that suggestion. So sometimes, well, quite often actually, with you know, light industrial or industrial sites, you get a developer that specializes in that kind of construction or production of product, right? And they, you know, I haven't seen very many examples where we've been successful in convincing somebody to, you know, ditch their development model and pursue something else. Because essentially that would mean that they might have to sell the property. It's just not the kind of business they're in.
Okay. Should we call it at that? Okay. I will call the meeting to a close. Is there a motion for that? Kareem, seconded by Luke. Anyone opposed? Nope. All right. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos.
Bye.